Hey, Jen.
Hi, Monet. How are you?
I'm good. This is the second week of school for my kids, so I feel like we're kind of getting into that routine, which feels good. Last week was a little crazy, but this week is starting to feel like we're getting the swing of things. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm getting over being sick, but my kids went back to school today, so I'm excited about that. It's been nice to have a house to myself. It's very quiet. My husband has to go into the office most days now, so it's just me and the puppy, which is bittersweet, but it's nice to get some work done and it's nice to get some galleries out. I feel like I've been just trying to play catch up all summer, so
Yeah,
be
me
nice
too.
to just get back on track.
Yeah. Yeah.
Felt
There's
like ever
something
since,
about that consistency that feels really,
yeah.
really good, really refreshing. So, yeah, a little early for me. Our kids start school really early. So I'm still trying to like wrap my mind around that. But I'm grateful that they are back in school. So,
Yeah.
well, do you want to launch into what we're talking about today? This, I think, is such an important topic and something that every birth worker and every birth photographer becomes very well acquainted with, and that's being on call.
Yeah.
It is the most unique aspect, I think, of this job, and perhaps the most challenging aspect of this job. It's something that we experience as birth photographers, but also doulas live this lifestyle, community-based midwives, right? Midwives that are like working home birth practices live this lifestyle. So we certainly aren't alone, but we definitely are a very small subset of the population that lives life like this. So we thought it would be good to talk about it, to talk about what it means for us, what it means for our families, the hardest parts, and the ways to make it a little bit easier. Hi, it's Monet and Jen, and we are the co founders of Birth Becomes You. We are birth photographers and doulas with over 10 years of experience. We've attended over 1,000 births collectively. We started Birth Becomes You to create a safe space for new and experienced birth photographers to share and grow. We aim to equip and empower birth workers to feel confident in the birth space and take beautiful, world changing images. We believe in a world where birth is visible, where shame is absent, where fear is translated to power, and where each individual's experience is honored as valid and valued. We are so glad you're here, and we can't wait to learn and connect with you. I think we should just start with a basic definition, Jen. What does it mean to be on call for you? Like when a client hires you, what do you typically say is your like on call period?
I generally say between 38 and 42 weeks. And I know that's a little controversial because a lot of birth photographers will go on call at 37 weeks. But in Michigan, at 42 weeks, you do not have to be transferred to the hospital to be induced. So I've had clients go to 43 weeks. So I like to start my on call time between 38 and 42. And what that really means is if you call me at 36 weeks, 37 weeks, 29 weeks, I'm still coming to your birth. It's just a time frame for me to like set some parameters around, really.
Right. Right. I find that if you're working with like a professional, like full-time birth photographer or birth worker, most of us are on call most of the year, if not all of the
Yeah.
year. And so we do kind of try to put parameters, like we try to say like 37 weeks, 38 weeks. But by and large, the majority of us are kind of on call for our clients really from the moment that they hire us. I've had clients call me very early due to an emergency or a situation that, of course, no one wants to have happen. But by and large, I'm able to either go myself or find a backup to go if I'm like out of town. But that so rarely happens because part of being on call is that it's very difficult to
Right.
go out of town.
Right.
So,
When are you going out of town?
right, right. That is quite, it's not as simple. And I think that when you are the birthing person, when you're having the baby, of course, it makes sense that someone is going to be available for you if you go into labor at 38 weeks or 41 weeks, right? It's your baby. It's the most important day in your life, obviously. It's a little bit harder though when you're a birth worker and you're working with like 30 or 40 families that have a similar big level event happening because I have to be that prepared not only for your family, but for many other families all at the
Right.
same time concurrently. It's a big commitment, a big obligation, and it totally shapes your life. Like it's not just a job, it's a lifestyle because I do have to be available to go to a birth at any hour, day or night. And I don't think many people that work can relate to that, right? Like can relate to their boss being able to call them at every single hour of the day and say, actually, you know what? I need you to come to work now. And it's like urgent. So you need to get here in 30 minutes. Like that is kind of a wild thing that we do. And it definitely impacts our lifestyle quite a bit. So I don't know, Jen, do you have anything like you want to share about how it impacts your lifestyle or your family's lifestyle?
Yeah, I think as my kids have gotten older, my kids are 12 and 8 now, and I see it impacting our family more and more. I mean, of course, it always did, right? Like when they're babies, then you're not breastfeeding them when you're gone. So that's a little bit difficult. When they get to be a little bit older, they miss you in certain ways. And now that they're in school and they have activities, missing those activities is a really big deal. And so, it is hard to be able to juggle that. Like, it's not just me on call, my whole family is on call.
Yeah.
And I really try to make that, clear to my clients when they're hiring me or choosing to hire me, because I want them to like think about, you know, what my job is for them as much as what their job is for me, like to call me and to keep me updated. And I just think that like knowledge across the board is really important for both parties in this relationship, really, because it's hard to be on call and it's hard for your family, it's hard for your kids. It's a lifestyle for sure.
It is lifestyle. I mean, you think about, if you talk to any kind of like parent coach or like child psychologist, they always talk about how kids like structure, they like
Right. They
routine,
thrive on structure.
thrive on that.
Consistency.
And as you can imagine, it's really difficult when suddenly like we're having dinner and it's going to be bedtime soon, but
Mhm.
then suddenly mom's phone rings and she is literally dropping everything. She's had, 3 bites of dinner. She's kissing you goodbye and she's gone for conceivably an unknown amount of time. It's really hard on kids. And I think that, it's one of the reasons I tell my clients, please, if possible, of course, it's not always possible, but if it is possible, give me as much notice like as you can. Tell me when you
Mhm.
think you're in early labor. It's not just so that like I have my batteries packed. Like all of that camera stuff is pretty easy, actually. The preparation is more for my family to let my kids know, hey, think someone might have a baby today. I'm not sure when. Even giving them like a few hours to ruminate on that versus me suddenly being like, "Oh my gosh, I got to go. See you later." It's easier. But I
Yeah.
agree with you, Jen. We both have our daughters are like in this kind of like tween age now, our oldest daughters. And we're both finding, I think, that just through conversations that we're having, that the emotional needs of our kids are
Yeah.
growing as they get bigger. And
Yeah.
it's not so much, I don't know, like, I think the magical age of like going to births with kids is honestly like the ages of like 3 to 6, maybe 3 to 7, because I feel like that they're not babies, so they don't need to like be nursing, but they also are kind of, I don't know, like it's still hard, but there's something a lot harder when your kid is having like a really hard time emotionally with one of her friends or her peer group. And you really want to be able to sit down with them and talk to them after school. But instead, suddenly you're leaving for a birth and you might be gone for a really long time. Like that's really, really hard as a parent to have to walk away when your kids are struggling like that.
Yeah. And it's not even like the walking away, like that's hard too. But what if that's the moment that the client wants, texts you and says, I think my water broke. What do you think? Or I'm having a hard day. I really need to talk to you. I need to talk to somebody, So like leaving is hard, but just like the constant attachment to the phone,
Yes.
attachment to the responses that you have to make, and you have to send those responses quickly. If somebody's like wondering if their water broke or if they're having a panic attack about their new baby, like, you do need to check in with them pretty quickly. And so it's hard to like hold your phone and read that and look at your teenager and then be like, what am I going to do right now?
Right.
And that's been my struggle, I think. It's just,
Yeah.
finding that balance and constantly like saying like, my client's important, but you're more important and I have to manage them both. I mean, I constantly tell my kids that and I try to like just give them a lot of honesty. Like it just so happens that this is the time that my client needs me and you need me now too. And it doesn't feel very fair to
Right.
any of us right now.
Right.
But
Right.
and
Yeah.
sometimes you just have to like triage what needs to happen too. So,
Yeah. I think triage is a great word, Jen, because
mhm.
that does feel like what this job is quite often. I think the dependency that we have to have on our phones can be exhausting. I was at a
It's
friend's house
exhausting.
and they were talking about how, like, at 9 o'clock, they all put their phones in this little box and it's like so relaxing for them because they get to, like, they turn their phones off and they go to sleep. And I just literally
Don't
was
know what
like
that means.
staring at them with my mouth probably like gaping open because there has not been a single night in the last year where I've been able to turn my phone off or where I've gone to sleep not being prepared to get woken up and go to a birth. And that level of kind of constantly having to be competent and on
Yeah.
is
And
wild.
on. Yeah.
I mean, I don't drink anymore, mainly because for me, like getting buzzed or like having a little bit too much to drink and then having to go to a birth just feels too, I can't, like, it's already complicated enough. And if I add in like
Right.
alcohol or another substance, it's just way more than I can handle. And so I don't drink anymore. And it's fine for the most part, but I think that there are times where I'm like, gosh, it's Friday night. I would really
Yeah.
like to like unwind and not even like drink, but just to like completely relax and
Hmm.
be to feel like I can just
It's a weekend
yeah, it's
or
weekend and I'm going to get this time off with my family. And
yeah.
I don't get that really.
Yeah.
And it's hard. And I think Jen and I think we talk about this a lot with each other, right? This is the most support that we need. It's not the how do we take the most beautiful image or how do I handle this camera situation.
Right.
It's how do we handle being on call? And when is it okay to set boundaries? And when is it not okay to set boundaries? And is this appropriate? My 80-year-old dad came over last night and he's always trying to like troubleshoot my business. He was a business owner himself for 30 years. So he's always trying to troubleshoot my business. And I was talking about how hard it was to be on call. And he was like, well, he was like, you should just, like basically his answer was just like send a backup, when you don't feel like going or your kids are having a hard day. And we love backups. Backups are so important. I think they have to be utilized.
Hmm.
But I also think that people don't understand how emotionally difficult it is for us as birth photographers to send a backup.
Yeah.
Even when we know we should send one, even if it's like there's something really big and important going on, I need to send a backup. It still breaks my heart. I still feel really guilty because it's usually like a really big moment for my family or my kids or my husband, but it's also my client's really big moment. And of course, they want me to be there, right? Like
Yeah.
they want me, the person that they hired, to show up. They're very gracious if a backup has to come. They understand, but you're still having to disappoint somebody. And that's a hard
Yeah.
thing to do, especially if you're a people pleaser. And I think
Yeah.
Jen, we're both kind of people
Oh, yeah.
pleasers. So it's definitely emotional for us when we have
Yeah.
to set that boundary and we feel bad. I had somebody that had a baby on Eliza's eighth birthday. You remember this birth? I was talking to you
Yeah.
about it. And
Yeah.
I was at the birth earlier in the morning. So I wasn't there when she woke up. And her birthday is a really big deal to her. It really is. She talks about it all year long. And so I had to make the call in the middle of the day. Hey, I've got to bring in a backup because my daughter, she needs me to be with her for her birthday.
Mhm.
And I knew it was the right choice, but it still was hard. And I didn't want to have to make it. So it's just
Yeah.
it's complicated. It's a complicated lifestyle, to
It
say the
really
least.
is. It really is. I had a similar situation with Clementine's birthday, and this was a couple years ago. I mean, I've had multiple, times when that's, you know, happened since then, but this one just stood out because this client, my daughter's birthday party was like on a Sunday, and the client's water broke like early on like a Friday. And then she never went into labor. And I had to tell her, like, I told her on Friday night, I was like, well, I do, my daughter has a birthday party on Sunday. We have all these people coming to our house. And it was even outside of, I think, my call period, whatever. I would have gone to her birth anyway, of course. But she understood the birthday party situation. And it worked out. I ended up being able to go to her birth, but it was Sunday night or maybe even Monday morning. So she went all that time without having contractions. She ended up transferring out of like home birth care into the hospital, got induced. And, so it was the whole kind of thing before she had the baby. But the whole weekend,
Yeah.
she just kept thinking, like, I can't have this baby on Sunday because
Right.
then Jen won't be there. And that
Right.
sucks for her. And she's a repeat client. So we were able to like talk about this and have a conversation. And she was very understanding, as was I. I didn't want to miss her birth either. And so it was just one of those situations where you're just like, okay, well, have your baby now, Friday night, Saturday, all day Saturday, Saturday. And it just never happened. But anyway, eventually it did work out. But the whole time we were just all stressed. And
Yes.
there's just that like level of like, we not, you don't know what's going on. Plus, her water broke on Friday. So regardless of the birthday party or not, I was still going to that birth. And so you're still kind
Right.
of waiting, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that's a long wait just to kind of put everything on hold because when it's time, it's going to be time and it's going to be time fast.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's just always a lot of juggling. And for
And
me, I guess that's
canceling and rescheduling. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And rescheduling. Yes.
Yeah.
That's
I think that's a good point too, is that it's not just the being on call and waiting for the call, which is hard, but oftentimes, and you and I can relate to this, we get a call in the morning or in the middle of the night where someone, like you said, water broke
oh,
or
yeah.
thinks they're in labor. And then you're in this really weird, like
Limbo.
liminal space where
Mhm.
it's not time to go to the birth, but you also probably shouldn't go out on the boat with your friends. You probably shouldn't go on a hike in the mountains. You probably shouldn't even go, to the farmer's market. You need to stay close to home. And so sometimes that means that I cancel like an entire day worth of plans. And then I sit at home the entire day because labor never ends up picking up. That happens a lot. I
It
mean,
happens
I
a
hate to
lot.
say it, it
Yeah.
happens a lot. And
Yeah.
it's a tricky part of this on call piece is that, you're always on call. And then when you get kind of an indication that something's happening, you're extra on call. And then you have to decide.
Mhm.
There was like, I wanted to go see a therapist and I was looking at her cancellation policy, which is something people don't think about either.
Oh,
But a lot of places, dentist office, like healthcare in general, like therapists, getting your hair cut, they have 24-hour cancellation policies where if you cancel less than 24 hours, you have to pay a fee. And sometimes it's a hefty fee. And so
wow.
I don't get my hair cut very often. I I'm sure I've made my dentist hate me because I've had to cancel so many dental appointments because a birth happens.
Yep.
This therapist that I really wanted to see, I was like, well, shoot, like I can't afford to spend $100
If I don't go.
if I
Yeah.
don't go. I just can't right now. And so
Yeah.
it's things like that that is just it's very unique to the lifestyle that we live and it's very challenging. So I think we've definitely talked about the hardest parts of being on call, but what are some ways to make being on call easier, Jen? Like what has worked for you or your family?
I think always being prepared is
Yes.
something that, I always have batteries charging. All my camera stuff is in the bag. And I take my bag with me a lot of places, which I don't love doing. So you're putting, tons of money worth of equipment in your car and it can get hot or cold depending on the weather, but it's the safest way for me. I also have to have a lot of plan Bs. Like there's a scenario and a second scenario in every situation, every
Yes.
single day, whether it's taking a kid to gymnastics practice or picking up somebody from volleyball or the team dinner or whatever. I have to have some sort of plan B. Even my kids, like, they will say, are you going to pick me up or is that are you going to be at a birth? Like they need a plan B too,
Right.
whatever it is, especially if there's somebody kind of like with early labor or something like that.
Right.
But just lots of plan Bs, especially for my oldest. She has a hard time with not having a schedule. And so trying to like give her some sort of schedule in this job is imperative, but also really difficult. And whatever schedule I give her, it could be totally wrong. We have no idea. So I think that's ways that it's been easier, but it's still also, you're still juggling and you're still guessing.
Yes.
I mean, I'm constantly waiting for like the crystal ball that tells me like, okay, you will go to this birth in 16 hours. Like that would be lovely. I even had a midwife tell me yesterday she was at a hair salon and she was getting color and she thought she had all this time and she was just so happy. And then her client called her in labor and she had to have the stylist wash everything out. She has like long, long hair. So it was like your hair. So it was just a lot. When she, of course, was apologizing the whole time and then had to leave. So,
Um,
I mean, we've all done that. We've all had to like do those situations. And so, plan B for that. I mean, every single doctor's office, haircut place, everything, they all know what I do. And I have to like let them know that because I need to know their cancellation policy, just like you said, but to also give them a heads up that, I'm going to get my hair cut, but maybe I'm not.
right.
And that's hard.
Exactly.
And that's
It
hard.
is hard. It is
Um,
hard.
But
I
just
think
telling
another
people and
thing,
making people aware, I think is
yeah.
important.
I think another thing too is setting reasonable expectations with your
Yeah.
clients, right? This is one of the reasons that
That's
we
hard.
created,
That's yeah.
yeah, it's why we created the BBY contracts though, because we felt like it was really important to clearly lay out what our responsibility was to our clients and then what our clients' responsibility was to us. And one of those pieces that I rely upon and I remind myself about over and over and over again is the amount of time that I ask people to notify me before I need to show up for a birth.
Yeah.
In my contract, I think it's around 1.5 hours. I see it, I say from the moment you text me to when I show up, it's an hour. You need to kind of gauge it to give me an hour and a half. Mainly because, I live really close to most people, like to most birth locations, to the hospitals here in Denver. But when I get that text message, I may not be at home. I may be at a
Right.
soccer game. I may be at Whole Foods. I may be at the zoo. And so I need time to gather my kids, to gather my family, get us back home, get my bags, and then go. And so knowing that's in my contract, that I have an hour and a half, helps me breathe a little bit easier. Of course, it sucks when somebody texts you and they're having a precipitous birth. That's like nobody's fault, right? It's
Right.
not their fault. It's not my fault, but we are human beings. And so it's not reasonable for someone to text you and then you to show up to their house in 15 minutes.
Mm.
That's unless you live right
Really
next door,
hard.
it's
Yeah.
really hard to make that happen. Most of us have to live our lives during that 5-week period. We can't just be in our car ready to go to your birth.
Hmm.
But I think that expectation, I remind myself, okay, Monet, I know you feel panicked right now, but you have an hour and a half. Like, do take care of yourself, make yourself breakfast, take care of your kids, say goodbye to them. Yes, it's important to make it to this birth, but you have to regulate your nervous system to stay in this long term. And if you are just like, well, I gotta call
Frantic. Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
It's a very intense adrenaline energy that's not good for you. And it's not good for the person that you're about to be with, the birthing person you're about to be with. That adrenaline energy is not great. So
It's
take
not
that
great for your
time.
family either. I
No,
mean,
no. You gotta
especially when
really,
you're like running out the door, you got to try to make it as
yes,
smooth as possible, which is
yes,
hard,
yeah.
impossible, but
It is. I think also having great backups, having a good solid backup, and then
yeah.
including in your contract that you utilize a backup, of course, for emergencies, but I also have it in my contract that I will utilize a backup if I need rest or if there's something important happening with my family.
Yeah. That's
Because
so
to
important.
me, that is just as important than, if I'm sick, yeah, but if my mom's 70th birthday was a couple weekends ago, she only turned 70 once. My mom raised me. She's a very important person in my life. It was important that I was there with her just for a couple of hours, but that I was there. And so I think it's okay to set up boundaries around your life. A lot of birth workers feel, and you see some of this tension in some of these Facebook groups where doulas will be like, I would never miss a client's birth and I would never. And it's like, I understand. And of course, you want to be committed to clients and you don't want to be wishy washy and you don't want to, take people on. But as someone with four kids that all have very important lives and things happening in their little worlds, it's important that I prioritize them. As a mom, it's important. And the only reason I've been able to do this for so long is that I have set aside time and I have utilized a backup when I've needed to so that I can put them first because so often they're not first. They have to kind of sit back and let these births lead the way for our family. And so it's important that I carve out time for them throughout the year where they feel like mom's choosing me over everything else.
Hmm.
And you can use a backup, use someone that you trust, put it in your contract, explain it to your clients. All of your clients are either parents already or are becoming parents. And I think when you spell it out to them, explain to them, I'm not like going out to party with my friends. I'm doing this to be with my kid or my mom or someone that's really important to me, or I'm getting a mammogram or I'm taking care of my health, whatever it might be. I think when you explain it in those real human terms, people understand. You have to have a
Yeah.
good back though that will
Yep.
step in for you because you can't
Yeah.
just abandon somebody. You have to have somebody that you can call in when you need that
Yeah.
extra support.
Yeah, for sure. That's just so important. Like, I mean, having my backup makes my life 10 times easier. And the stress level is much, 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 much less when I know that I have a solid backup who is there for me and prepared. And it's hard to find those people. Like when you have somebody, I'm always like, okay, come hang, stay forever because like having a good backup is just so important in this job. I had to use my backup. It was kind of a funny situation earlier in the year. It was a repeat client, so I really wanted to go to this birth, and I got influenza A, and I was not going to the birth. Like I was not moving from my bed. I was really sick, and the client had checked in and said that maybe she was considering being induced, and she wondered what I thought, or what she wanted to make sure I was available. And I actually said to her at that moment, like, if you want to be induced, that's totally, your prerogative. Do whatever you need. I have the flu. If the birth happens today, I will have to send Kathleen. I cannot move. Like, I can't. I had a fever of 102. And she said, okay, I'll hold off. And she was fine with that. She was like happy to do that. I was like, okay, great. And I remember texting with my backup, Kathleen, before this. And I was like, should I tell her? And Kathleen was like, I think you should tell her. So that's what we did. And then I kid you not, 2 hours later, the client texted, she said, my water broke. And
God.
so Kathleen went to the birth anyway. She had the baby from that point. She had the baby, I think, 4 hours after that. I mean, she didn't even have contractions when she texted to say her water broke. An hour later, she was at the hospital with Kathleen, maybe 2 hours later. And then the baby was born an hour after that. So it was really fast. But I mean, I was so grateful to have Kathleen in that moment. She knew, the client knew, everybody was on the same page. It was the way that it worked out, but it did. And like that would have just been a really hard situation had Kathleen not been there, been ready, and just able to step in because it wasn't a choice of like, I have a cold. Do you want me to come? I mean, this was like, I was not moving. Like there
Right.
was
Right.
no,
Right.
we were really
Yeah,
sick.
and I think that highlights the fact that you have to take care of yourself and you have to
Yeah.
put yourself first, or you're not going to be able to do this for long. And it's hard because this is kind of a job that definitely feels like it needs to have this air of like selfless energy, but you do have to be selfish sometimes so that you can continue to serve these
Yes,
families. I
exactly.
think another thing that's really important is you have to find ways to regulate your nervous system because being on call, you are living at this higher level of intensity than most people 24/7. And so you have to figure out what regulates your nervous system. For myself, and I know for you too, Jen, we walk a lot. Like we go
Mhm.
on walks every day. We're always talking to each other on walks. And I think there's something about that gentle movement that just,
Mm.
if I get a call where I'm like, oh my gosh, someone's in labor, but it's not time for me to go yet, I'll often just like walk around the block to just kind of get some of that adrenaline out of my body and to kind of settle down. Some people practice breathing, like on the way to birth. So, like, do really like rhythmic breathing. I think eating well, taking care. Again, it all comes back to taking care of yourself, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you won't be able to do this for very long. Your body will be like, whoa, I can't handle this. This is too
Yeah.
intense. And you'll have to stop. And I also think, to be honest, and this is a hard thing to say, but I do think that some personality types are suited for this job and some are
Some are
not.
not. Yeah, for
And you
sure.
don't really know until you do it. But I can think of countless people that were really talented birth photographers or birth workers, but they just couldn't handle the lifestyle. It's not a moral failing, it's just a personality thing. Jen and I, we talk about this a little bit. We're both a little neurodivergent. And I think we see that a lot in
Birth.
people that do birth work
Yes.
for whatever reason. I think that there are certain people that this lifestyle just doesn't work for, and it's okay if that's you. But there are things you can do. You could work in a collective. There's ways
Yes.
to mitigate some of the stressors if you love this job, but you don't necessarily feel like you can do the 24/7 on-call lifestyle,
Mhm.
you know? I
I
mean, I
think
think that's
just
why lots of
yeah.
people work in the hospital, right? It's
Yeah.
because it's the shift work. They love
Right.
birth, but they don't want to be on call 24/7. So
Right.
I get it.
Yeah, no, I think the collective is a great idea. I wish
Yeah.
there were more collectives, and I wish that was an easier model for everybody to continue to use, because I think moving forward, birth work, you need somebody in it with you. You need a teammate, you
Yeah.
need a team, you need a partner, whatever it is. It's hard to do this work solo. So having people around you, really makes it not only sustainable, but more enjoyable too.
Absolutely. I
Mhm.
totally agree.
Having coworkers, it's nice to have them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you get to pick them in a
Right.
sense, because
Right.
you're an entrepreneur and you get to do that. And
That's
that
a
is the nice part.
cool part of the job for sure.
Yeah. Well, Monet, do we want to wrap up the podcast by talking about when we would go to births? You've had some,
Yes.
so do you have anything? Do you have anything you want me to try to guess? I haven't heard too many of the birth. Well, I guess I've heard some of them. So see if you can find one that I haven't.
Yeah. So
It's been a weird year for births for
it
us.
has been a
I
weird
feel
year
like
for
we could
birth.
say that every year, but
This was an induction for a first time mom. You may have heard some of this, but we'll see if you can forget what you have heard. First
that's easy.
induction, and she had a Foley balloon. The Foley balloon, and she had two rounds of side attack Foley balloon, and the Foley balloon fell out and her water broke. They checked her right afterwards and her water broke. And she was like 5 centimeters, 80% effaced, -1, -2, maybe. But then the Foley balloon fell out and contractions stopped. So at that point, dad called me and said, hey, just want to let you know this is the update. The Foley balloon is out. She's 5 centimeters, not having contractions. And he asked me, when do you think you should come? So, what would you have said in response to that question?
Ooh, that's actually a little tough. I don't remember what happened with this one, so that's good.
Yeah.
I probably would have said, are they going to do anything to stimulate like more contractions? Are they going to give her Pitocin? Are they going to just have her walk? I probably wouldn't have gone unless I was their doula. I probably wouldn't have gone right then just because she wasn't contracting at that time. But once contractions started back up and they were consistent and regular, I would have gone pretty quickly after that.
Yeah.
For my first time clients, I like to leave around 5 to 6 centimeters because usually most of my clients are 30 to 60 minutes from me. So I like to have a little extra time. And it's nice to get there for a first time parent around 7 centimeters, but it's always different for every
Never
client.
know. And the
Yeah,
Foley balloons are tricky because they will
always
manually
tricky.
dilate the cervix, right? So it's sometimes hard to know,
Yeah.
especially when they fall out and contractions totally
Stop.
stop. It's like, well, was this like labor hormones or was this just manual dilation that was happening?
Yeah, that's what it's saying to me.
So what I told the clients, I said, look, I was like, as soon as things start up and they start feeling intense again, because they had felt really intense with the Foley balloon, which is common. I was
Hmm.
like, as soon as that intensity comes back, just let me know and I'll come. So they texted me like an hour later. Contractions were back. They were every like 2 minutes. She was feeling shaky. So I went to her birth and, we didn't have a baby until like midnight. And I think I left here around 6 p.m., but that's not like, that's totally
That's
normal for a
great.
first
Yeah.
time. That's great.
Hmm.
And she was just progressing really, it was like she was 5 centimeters, then she was 7 centimeters, then she was 8 centimeters, and she was complete. It was like a very kind of straightforward, beautiful birth. But it was definitely tricky because I was like, okay, you're 5 centimeters, your water just broke, all of this good stuff is happening, but you're
Right.
not contracting right now. So I stayed home, I had dinner with my family. And then things picked up. And so then I went as soon as they did. So it
Yeah.
ended up working out well.
That would have been a little trickier if that was a multip, but with the
Yes. Oh,
first
for
time.
sure. It was a multip. I would have probably been like waiting outside the door.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, with the first time, again, first time parents, births can be longer, but it often gives you a little bit more flexibility on your arrival time.
Yeah.
Being on call for multips is, I think, a lot more stressful in a lot of ways than
It
being on
is.
call
Yeah.
first time parents.
Yeah.
Because when things happen, they can often happen very quickly and they can kind of pick up out of nowhere. So
Hmm.
you do have to be extra prepared if you have multips, especially if you have multips that have had precipitous births, which,
Yeah.
we've all had. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be a fun
perfect.
fall. I have like 3 of those. So,
Yeah.
well, it was great talking with you today. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. And we're so appreciative that you're here and joining us on the podcast. So, yeah,
Yes, we love it. And thanks for all of your sweet messages. They mean the world to us. So thank
we
you.
really do. Thanks. Thanks for tuning in. Find out more about us, our courses, and other tools for birth photography at birthbecomesyou.com. And make sure to follow along on Instagram and Facebook at Birth Becomes You. And if you love listening, make sure to give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and subscribe wherever you listen. Thanks. Catch you on the flip side.